So, welcome to React Native for Fun and Profit. Hey, while I can't see anyone I'm speaking to, I'm glad you're here. Welcome. My name's James. That picture that isn't Napoleon Dynamite is myself and my son fishing at Rock Creek outside Red Lodge back in May. I'm the lead dev at Associated Employers in Billings, Montana. We are a member organization that helps small business realize big goals. From week to week, I'm working on different products and services we offer, including payroll, human services, safety training, and health insurance. I work full stack with apps and built with libraries like Ember, React, and Vue, and mostly Node on the back end. You're not here for my resume, but due to the vast offerings at Associated Employers, I'm typically like a jack of all trades, master of none. Even though I'm a professional web developer for over 8 years, I'm constantly learning and constantly pushing myself outside my comfort zone. Take speaking, for example. Take this example of 2019 James and 2020 James talking to colleagues. Explaining TypeScript in 2019, TypeScript is a pendulum swing. Give it a while and you'll see. Explaining TypeScript in 2020, yeah, so a generic type is like a placeholder for a dynamic type you can pass in and use in a function. So first of all, a thumbs up to the Big Sky DevCon team for making this conference happen safely in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. I think it's important that developers, typically introverted and recluse by default, get together to share ideas, flex their social skills, and meet new people, especially in a localized setting such as Montana. And while this isn't exactly happening this year the same way, hopefully we'll still get a chance to learn and ask questions. So, what is React Native? React Native is essentially React bundled with native bindings without virtual DOM or without a similar build workflow. Released somewhere around 2015, it's the learn once, write anywhere counterpart for native development. Let's dive into our topics. Before we can head straight into the intricate details of building and deploying something on React Native, we need to grasp a high-level overview of what we're trying to achieve today. With React Native, you're likely trying to take an idea and supply a mobile app for it. By the end of today's talk, if you come here with some React knowledge, I'm hoping that you'll leave with some gusto and wit to try and build your own app and some guidance on how to bring it to the App Store. Let's fill in some blanks here. Step one is most of you are, hopefully. If you're more like step 5, this talk will be helpful in the latter part. If you're at step 6, well, it's a virtual conference. Come back in an hour. Let's go through these one at a time and offer some explanation. So, step 1. While tutorials are nice, the best way I've found is through the fiery depths of sheer struggle until you get a breakthrough of understanding. Before you can plunge into the depths of struggle, you need an idea. Step 2, we'll need to learn React Native. If you have some knowledge of React, you have a massive head start, but you're certainly not out of the water. Step 3 can best be summed up by, where did my text element go? It was in the code, but where is it on the screen? If you haven't the faintest idea about what I mean when I say Flexbox, we'll get to that, don't worry. Step 4, begin to have some fun with development. Let loose your inner style while exploring the bounds of the framework. Step 5, a mysterious step filled with potholes and loose gravel, deploying your app. Step 6, your finished app, raking in boatloads of cash to blow on Ferraris. Well, probably not that much, but at least something. With a rough process in place, let's continue on. I'd like you to meet Jeff. Jeff and I met in downtown Billings at a cozy coffee house called Moab Coffee. His first words to me were along the lines of, "So what do you do? You're always in here with a computer and you stay here for most of the day." I had no idea he was the owner of the coffee shop. After brief introductions, we hit it off, and from then on, Jeff always knew my name when he saw me frequenting the cafe. One day I rode a motorcycle to the cafe to work, and Jeff let me park it inside. Yeah, inside a coffee shop. Picture or it didn't happen, right? Over the years, I'd host many meetups as the Billings area organizer for Montana programmers at Moab, claiming a small part of the cafe for myself and my meetup acquired friends and nerd family. From time to time, Jeff would come over to the nerd corner and bounce ideas off me, and I'd tell him about the latest interest from CNC, 3D printing to what I was working on professionally. To my surprise, one day, he asked if I had ever built a mobile app. I sort of laughed and spouted a much repeated, canned response, "No, that's not what I do." I did tell him I'd like to learn, though. He followed up with "Well, if you ever do, I have an idea about what to build." You must understand, I'm not the type to go inside in search of a side hustle. Upholding a regular position as a lead and home life with, at the time, a 1-year-old isn't exactly the type of lifestyle you're able to throw a side hustle into very easily. I had managed to, over the years, still maintain some simple freelance contracts, nevertheless, and make a little extra on the side, like most of us. Now, with that understanding, back to our conversation with Jeff, I probe him for his idea, because I've just got to know. Jeff says, "I'm thinking about a simple order-ahead app that a small business can afford. A person opens the app, orders what they want, heads to the coffee shop, and picks it up." I'm immediately intrigued and follow up with, "So why not Square Stores or Uber Eats, etc.? He responds, "It's just too expensive. Square Stores is web-based, and all of them have requirements as well. It's just not worth it to our small business to offer that experience for what they're asking." I tell him I'll think about it and get back with him next week. My mind immediately starts wheeling about what to build, how to build it, and definitely how to over-engineer it. That night, I'm digging into React Native docs, trying to wrap my head around what seems to be a similar but all too different world. You see, that night, I was pulling from React knowledge from several years prior and my own side hustle work. My current day-to-day isn't in React, but I have worked with React professionally for almost a year for a real estate company based out of New York. I had also worked with React even that year to build a personal site and several client sites, utilizing Gatsby. Trying to distinguish React and React Native differences for me wasn't exactly cut and dry. What I noticed right off the bat, though, was the presence of these common modules, view and text. In noticing that, I noticed the ideology of component architecture was pretty much the same. After all, still React underneath the hood. Third, the module and component system being the same, I could probably still manage data the same way as I did in other React apps I had worked on. Fourth, for me, there was some preconceived notion that this wasn't the case, but networking works the same, as it utilizes fetch, and underneath the hood does all the conversion, which means you can fetch and send data the same way. At this point, I'm feeling great. I mean, it's mostly the same. Diving in deeper, though, is when you start to realize the difference. When you're in the web world, lots of abstractions happen for you to make design and interaction easy. In React Native, you're still dealing with a native system, so some strange artifacts surface that a web dev usually doesn't have to deal with. For example, all text must be rendered in a text component. So, first of all, when it comes to building your app, in React, Webpack is like the model solution for doing so. In React Native, there's lots of options. You could either compile and build in Xcode or Android Studio, or use a tool like Expo. We'll get into that later. If you come from the CSS world and have learned enough to find CSS predictable, You'll find web styling in React Native somewhat cumbersome. So if like web styling on React is like this, then React Native is more like this. With some differences discovered, I felt as though I could like go out and apply some React knowledge and play around with making a basic app. How hard could it be? Sometimes getting to the starting line is the most difficult part. With a React app, I'd just run create React app, maybe install some packages, and be on my way. Just like any new framework, React Native comes with its own set of tools. Instead of create React app, I discovered React Native has a group of tooling collectively called Expo. In steps Expo, the company with a set of tools that can easily help you get started with React Native without cracking open Xcode or Android Studio. There's the client, which allows you to use your own phone wirelessly without Xcode or Studio to test your app as you develop. There's the CLI that handles all sorts of things for you. There's the SDK, which is a library of things for React Native that make it tangibly approachable to build your app with different native technologies. Lastly, while I wouldn't recommend it for more than experimentation, there's the Snack app that bundles everything of that into a nice web IDE and device simulator. Whoa, but wait. What about vendor lock-in? You mentioned Expo as a separate company and handles all these things for you. The last thing anyone wants to do is to be stuck with a tool they inevitably drop like it's hot, and suddenly your npm install fails with a 404. We'll get to how Expo allows for migration off their tooling later, but for now, it's a recommended way to get started with React Native according to React Native's site. So I'd say you're okay to start out with Expo. Back to the story again. I'm sitting there, I'm feeling giddy about getting started. I install Expo CLI, run Expo init. Within minutes, I'm up and running with what seems to be an innocuous React app directory. I run Expo start, and it tells me my app is running. Me, being the nerd that I am instantly interested in Expo client, the app you can run on your own phone and basically stream your dev app straight to your phone. I download it, run it, and within a few minutes, it discovers my server running on my Mac. I boot the app on my phone, and after a loading screen, I'm presented with this welcome page. Curious as ever, I jump into the code, start digging around. What I'm looking at is JSX that's displayed on my device. Simply put, an app is born. I yell to my wife, who at the time is asleep on the couch, "Come check this out." Sort of in a daze of confusion, she shambles over and says, "What?" I hold up my phone, I tell her, "Look, I've got a mobile app booted on my phone. If I make a change over here in the code, it updates over here, just like I was working on a web page." She tells me, "Nice, it's almost midnight." I nod and realize I'm a tired adult that has responsibilities tomorrow and shut everything down for the night. Over the next week, I ended up developing a dry mock-up of what I wanted the order app to look like. I had something tangible for the front side by Tuesday the following week. In less than a week, and a few hours of free time, I'd taken my web knowledge and applied it to a native app and make a nice mock-up that runs on a phone without learning a new language. To me, that's incredible and like extremely powerful. So what did I learn in those few hours here and there? Pretty much Flexbox. But why Flexbox? Isn't Flexbox just one option in a sea of tables, floats, and grids? Not at all. Since there is no DOM, everything must be rendered in a React Native component parent like Vue. And we end up losing a bunch as far as layout goes. In particular, the ability to lay out elements like we would in HTML and CSS. There is no DOM, no bounds in which CSS can realize, so Flexbox is pretty much the React Native's way of positioning things on the phone. Flexbox is very powerful though, fortunately, but still not entirely predictable in React Native. The CSS properties and React Native CSS properties aren't exactly interchangeable. According to the React Native docs, the defaults are different for flex direction, and flex property only supports a single number. Developing with Flexbox and React Native, even if you have a grasp of the differences, can still be a bit challenging. If you get something wrong with the layout, like I did from time to time, I often found that React Native would just throw the component halfway off the screen or off the screen entirely without any scroll option to see where it went. Oftentimes, this required a step back to look about the entire structure to figure out how things were being positioned. So, the following morning, Wednesday, I wake up. I'm excited that Friday, my coffee shop day, is inching closer so I can show this mock-up off to Jeff. I take a shower and step out, only to hear a pipe break and send gallons of water onto the floor behind the shower before I can run to the utility closet and shut off the water supply. This isn't the first time my shower unit had malfunctioned and sent a bunch of water into spaces that we couldn't dry up. This was the fourth time since we bought our house. Knowing putting in an equivalent unit would possibly cost me tens of thousands of dollars and water damage remediation, by Wednesday afternoon, I had decided I would DIY a renovation and build a shower with zero experience in building showers. Yeah, so I know what you're thinking, a web dev doing home construction work with zero experience. Thursday, I start demolishing the shower unit. I had had enough of the leaks, breaks, and the annoyance, and it wouldn't come out as is, so I got to delightfully saw it into pieces. Fast forward to Friday. I've now exposed mold-damaged subfloor that I can stick a screwdriver through that I have to replace. I'm sort of gutted and sort of determined to fix it. Nevertheless, thinking about developing the app idea Jeff has told me has got me excited. I get up, look at my demolished master bathroom, and head off to the coffee shop. I show the mock-up off to Jeff. He's ecstatic. He loves it. He's shocked I even took on the project. We work out some details, and I have some ideas to continue with the following week, and I instantly start envisioning interactivity. So, with the mock-up done, looking good enough to go forward with, the next thing I needed to do was to figure out the flow of data in and out of my app. I started with something like this. The user opens the app. We'll need to fetch a list of items we'll call the catalog. Once we have the items, we display them, and then the user makes updates to a cart. Eventually, they check out, and then later, they'll need to check their order status. With a basic progression, the API side seems fairly straightforward. We'll get a cached catalog from somewhere. When the user checks out, we'll need to process a payment and then create an order. When a user checks their order status, we'll just fetch an order update. This seemed really straightforward. In API land is somewhere my unfamiliarity with React Native could be countered with familiarity. Since we already have networking just like a browser, I can use a backend I'm familiar with. I'm getting excited. So, there's something I forgot to mention about Jeff's coffee shops. They all use Square kiosks to manage payments, orders, and even the store's music. It's this one place Jeff's employees learn to use, and they can basically run the entire shop, no matter which location they end up working in for the day. Jeff has the ability to check in on sales from one place rather than saying, call the store for details. So this brings up my mobile order app. How do I make this simple enough that there's little extra training and they aren't having to switch between apps to get access to orders? Well, I was in luck. Square, like most payment platforms, has an API. Even better, Square has a newer Orders API that seamlessly links the kiosks to themselves. This means if I create an order, it pops up on the kiosk. Wow, okay. So suddenly it's all coming together in my mind what needs to happen for checkout. First, the user initiates a checkout. It sends that request to our intermediary server. It creates an order and payment on the Square API, which relays back to the kiosk and then back to our app. We then will send some of that ordered data back to the app, and then sometime later, coffee. The benefit of leaning on the Square API is a seamless management of payments and orders that originate from our app. To ring things up in Square, sellers usually set up a catalog to select from. Suddenly, our catalog source is decided. We'll use Square as well. The Node API being the authenticated and cached source of that information. So, over the next few weeks, I developed this Square API integration. During this time, I realized the need for an intermediary database to handle additional models. I realized the data ownership structure. Square will house orders, payment, and payment information, and client data like items, locations, and store hours. My database will then need to house a copy of order data, client configuration specific to the app, like item ordering, item ignore lists, etc. Lastly, it'll need to house customer data for login, rewards, etc. So, I needed to make this Square API connection that I had made to my Node API and basically bring this mockup to life. So, make a request from the Node API from the app. Simple. Once I get back a list of items, render them. I ended up rearranging the mockup I had made based on the data I got back to play around with. At the API level, the Square data looked rough and was hard to iterate on. I ended up transforming it into something tangible for the front end. It looks like this. You have an item with a name and category. Inside the item, an array of item variations like 10 ounce, 12 ounce, and then lastly, an array of available item modifiers like vanilla syrup. This data can then be easily translated into JSX to provide a category, item name, and price or price range based on a calculation of my variations. After some design time, I've got a functional mockup to show a catalog dynamically from an API fed by Square. It's around the end of November now, a month into this endeavor, and I'm fired up. And yes, this GIF is a more current version of the app. I don't have any real progress screenshots along the way, so know that it looked much rougher than this initially. With that said, it was high time I show this functional mockup off to Jeff. In case you were or were not wondering about the renovation, around the same time I had torn up tile, removed and replaced most of the rotten subfloor, replaced and reframed my ceiling for cement board, did mold remediation, and framed up a bench and curb for the shower. We were looking like this for the makeup so far. So much more to go. And in case you were wondering how all of this was happening, here's my approximate schedule for this time frame through January. Monday through Friday, my schedule was pretty much the same. Wake up, work on the bathroom renovation, then work on the app. Saturday saw some family time before more reno and app time. And then Sunday, I let my body rest from the physical demand and just got some family time. The app still got some time as well. So, it's coffee shop day. I bring this catalog listing functional mockup to Jeff. He's happy about it, and even more happy about it when I tell him it's fed directly by a Square terminal. I demonstrate a product change in my Square admin sandbox and show him how the app updates the next time I open it. He's blown away. We talk about item modifiers and business logic surrounding that. I tell him I'll have more next week. So, what did I learn in this section of time? If you want to iterate quick, don't reinvent the wheel and let others handle some of the load for you. For example, in my case, Square API. Demo work is fun until you have to demo a second-story subfloor. Section list and scroll view, we'll get to this in a second, and navigation. Let's talk about our app's main screen. A screen is a web equivalent to a page. It's the area that renders beside our navigation. Inside our screen, we wrap everything in a safe area view, which is a Flexbox parent that can realize the safe edges of a device screen. Think about the iPhone notch, for example. We wouldn't want to render stuff inside there, or on the bottom where the iPhone pull tab is. Think of safe area view, in this case, as a body tag. You can see the header, maybe, is a view by itself. Similarly, the click on an item and add it to your order text is as well. Section list is rendered below that view. Section list is basically displaying the coffee, espresso, and pour-over categories right now. And it's basically a scrollable view or flat list with item groupings. These are more core components as well, flat list. Items can be grouped into sections in your data, and you get a neat scrolling effect where the category floats around as you scroll. On the left, you can see some JSX for the screen showing you how section lists can be set up. I have it rendering a text element for each header, like coffee, and then I have some styles applied to it. I also have it rendering my custom component catalog item for each item in the data array. Just a note, in this talk, I don't want to jump into navigation specifically. There are tons of tutorials on how to set up different navigation types, and diving into that will require more time than I have. So let's look at our data flow graph again. The thing I needed to accomplish next was simply to add an item to the cart. With this, I needed to enable the ability to add modifiers before you do. This slide is simple but complicated in the same time. When a user wants to add an item, they click on that catalog item that was in the list I showed you before. This should render a add item page or component. When it's open, it gets an initial item state. The user can then select some options or type in a note, and the item gets updated in the state housed in the component. When they touch add to cart, we'll push it to a global state. As far as the state visual goes on the right-hand side of this slide, I'm not deep diving into that. I use Redux for this, but there are plenty of options to house state in a React app, and the exact same principles apply to React Native. So, on to the looks. When we touch an item, navigating to a new screen just didn't seem right to me. There are tricky things we'd have to do with the state too, and this just didn't look right either. Plus, adding an item to the cart, to me, just seems like this intermediary catalog action. So, modals. Our relationship with each other on the web isn't always the best, but when I see you on React Native, I fall in love. You see, modals are basically screens that overlap your entire app and encapsulate interactivity. A perfect drop-in for quickly adding intermediary actions. So, with my discovery of a modal, I created an add item modal. This modal was responsible for setting up the item before adding it to the cart state. You can see in my example, I'll choose a variation, set some modifiers, add a note, and then add it to my cart. You'll notice the item price updates as you make selections. That's possible due to recalculations called in this internal item state, just because it's a React component. So with this interaction added, it's time to take it to Jeff. Jeff likes it. I'll tell him I figure out a way he can start beta testing my progress as I make changes. He seems really lost about that sentence and just gives me a thumbs up. Renovation check. It's now the end of December. I plumbed everything, installed a bunch of concrete board, done a bunch of floor cement work, waterproof the floor, bench, and installed some lighting. It's starting to come together. I left it here for several weeks while I traveled to Montreal, Canada for the Node.js Interactive Conference, and then enjoyed some time with the family for the holidays. As you can see in the top right corner of this image, there's a window that's pitch black. That's because it's always pitch black by the time I'm done with my renovation work for the day. Over the next few months, I'd feel rewarded as I designed and developed the cart UI, location switching, orders, auth flow, app affinity, so I could distribute different apps across the App Store for different companies. And then when I ran into issues was when I needed to process a payment. Remember when I said to lean on partner APIs to iterate fast? I needed to process payments utilizing Square, which means using their SDK. I could have sent card information to my server, but that's not very secure at all. It's better here to generate a nonce via direct communication with Square. Well, this is what caused me to finally need to eject my app. You see, there's a native module for Square payments, but when you need to integrate native modules, you need to eject your app. While this means you lose a lot of tooling, you can still use Expo libraries. Don't eject. Really, don't eject unless you need to. Let me graph this for you. As I understood Flexbox and learned about React Native core components, my fun level, and furthermore, my iteration speed was on an upward trajectory. As soon as I ejected, my life got difficult. Ejecting means you're dealing with native modules directly. You have to build an Xcode and/or Android Studio. Deployment also becomes more difficult. There's some decent documentation on ejecting your app, so I won't go into this more, but once it was ejected, though, I was free of some Expo lock-in. Ejecting means, all of this ejecting lunged me into deploying without Expo. So how was I going to eventually get this on the App Store? I mean, by this point, I'm ready to process payments. More than anything, I wanted to test on different devices, which meant bringing in a beta tester. Hey, do you remember how I told you, I told Jeff I'd let him beta test my progress? Well, for iOS, in steps TestFlight. TestFlight is an app that sits on your phone, just like the Expo client app. It's basically a private app store just for you and your testers. TestFlight has an admin interface offered in App Store Connect. I know this might be a lot to take in all at once, but deployment gets very complicated very fast. And with anything complicated, I graph it. I'm going to detail here the deployment of an iOS app. On Android, it's a little simpler. So on my computer, we've got the app and API. We've got a cloud service, in my case, Heroku, and we've got the Apple's cloud, and then lastly, someone's device. With the API, I can simply deploy an instance to Heroku, and bam, I've got that side deployed. With the app, obviously, it's a bit more intricate. With this tool called Fastlane, you can configure a deployment pipeline that will do the building, code signing, and a test flight deployment all from the command line. This reduces the complication of direct interaction with App Store Connect, Apple's way of uploading to TestFlight and the App Store. So, once it's on Apple's cloud, it goes through a review, which usually takes around 30 minutes. And then once that happens, you can add Apple IDs to allow download to somebody's device. There are some serious requirements that start to accumulate when you're deploying for the first time. On TestFlight, this includes a paid developer account that costs $99 a year. In turn, this requires a taxable entity, like an LLC. Before you can pay, Apple verifies you, which in my case took over 2 weeks. You're also required to code sign your build, which can take a little time to set up. Needless to say, once we were on TestFlight, Jeff was in. Let's go back to our chart. How was I going to eventually get this into the App Store? Once an app builds ends up on App Store Connect, you can actually promote it to a release to be published on the App Store. It's fairly simple from there. To get on the App Store from a promoted test flight app, you'll need the same things as before, but also you'll need to sign some more agreements with Apple. You'll need a stable build that the app review team can test. You'll need screenshots for every device you need to deploy to. This part took me a bit long. You'll need to also have nailed down the app name, description, icon, and any tags. So a reflection. Getting on the App Store isn't easy. Tooling can simplify it. Getting on the App Store requires a little money and a business depending on your situation. So where's the profit in this equation? Remember how I said to lean on partner APIs to iterate fast? Well, after an agreement with Jeff, adding a service fee that directed my Square developer account was ridiculously simple. Really, really simple. Adding that simple line called app fee money in the payment request tells Square to take a portion that should be paid to the merchant and redirect it to the API's actor. In my case, it's the developer account with Square. Suddenly, I'm able to profit off this endeavor. On February 18th, I promoted a test flight build into the App Store review process. Friday, we released the first version of Moav's mobile order app. Internally, its name became Full Cup, a completely customizable app for small business to offer order ahead. So what about that renovation? Remember how my shower and tub were leaking and causing major water damage, and I decided to tackle it DIY? Well, I ended up hiring someone to install the glass as I finished up the final details on trim and tile work. The wife, she's pretty happy about it. Myself, I guess I can do tile work now? What I hope you take away from this is more than just encouragement and wit to tackle your own app idea in React Native. One of the main reasons I showed you pictures of a home remodel during a tech conference talk is that I hope you take away the following and apply them to your everyday life. Everything is temporary. Permanency is simply the result of habit or lack of change. Even if it's 15 minutes, pluck away at your biggest projects. You think that 15 minutes isn't enough time to accomplish something, but the reality is you haven't broken down your project to achieve bite-sized results. If you're trying to change your life or behavior, stop forecasting and instead think about what you did yesterday. If yesterday you didn't spend time doing something to benefit today, fix that today. Even if it's 15 minutes, spend some time uninterrupted with your family or a new hobby every day. Learn a new skill today and tomorrow, and you'll be surprised about how old dogs learn new tricks. And coffee. Lots of coffee. Pictured in the right side is the first order receipt to print out during tests at the coffee shop. I'd like to leave some resources here for you. If you're in Billings and you'd like to support small business, download the iOS app for Moav at bit.ly/ordermoav. React Native's docs can be found at reactnative.dev. Expo tooling to get started with React Native is at expo.io. And Fastlane for deployment can be found at fastlane.tools. That's all, folks. I'm at James10x on Twitter and James10x on GitHub and LinkedIn. If you'd like to talk more about React Native or talk about deploying Full Cup, get in touch. And I think it's time for questions. Thank you, micro audience.
Nice. That was a super interesting talk. I had a couple questions of my own, and then we have a couple questions from the audience. First, Did you do the van nose wheelie yourself?
No.
Oh, okay. Is that a life ambition? I mean, that was pretty impressive.
I'm gonna look into it tomorrow, I think.
Another question I had was that slide you had with your schedule that you where you kind of laid out like, here's when I do my regular work and here's when I do my renovation and then my app development. Was that something you did right out of the gate or something that you just started doing later on?
I would say it was less structured. It was more like this is what ended up being due to like I would see the renovation and be like, I need to work on that tonight. And then I would be so tired from renovating, I would be like, I'm gonna go to bed, go get ready for bed, and then be like, well, I could work on the app. So I go work on the app.
Nice. How about, have you done any handling of price changes, or I guess when there are price changes at the store, are those reflected in your app through the Square API, or do you have to manually enter prices?
Yeah, so it's a cache catalog request. So when a price update happens, basically the next time somebody opens the app, it does a refresh on the catalog, and the price is updated automatically.
Cool. That seems pretty handy. All right. So, question from the audience. How about, was there any customer login on this?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry I didn't have enough time to throw that in. If you download the app, you can check it out. An interesting thing Apple just did in August was if you have a Facebook login, you have to now have sign in with Apple. So basically, to make a bug fix update this week, actually, I had to make sign in with Apple. So there's like sign in with Apple, email, and Facebook options.
Did you end up having a kind of client-side persistence for login tokens and?
Yes. So in React Native, there is async storage. It's basically like local storage. And then you can actually, with Redux, have a async storage store basically for Redux. So you can like serialize the state and shove it in async storage. So if somebody opens up the app, adds an item to the cart, which is in Redux, they close the app and they reopen it, it will still be in their cart, and that's in part thanks to async storage.
Nice. So does that mean that then works on both platforms?
Yes. So once you eject from Expo, doing both platforms is like making two apps at the same time. You do get like, you make everything in React Native, but like when you're building and everything, each platform has to be built independently. This is a little more difficult. With Expo, it's easier to do that.
Do you regret ejecting from Expo?
Yes. I think with somebody like me, who this app is not my primary thing every day, when I go back to do a bug fix or add a feature, it would have been easier to just have Expo doing the publishing rather than, having to do the publishing myself. So.
Were you paid in coffee or in dollars?
Paid in coffee for sure. Yeah, my friend Jeff is great. The app fee money is a great thing now. Every order that comes through the mobile order app, I get a percentage of that. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you Have you released on both platforms or just iOS?
I have not yet. Android's a little tricky as far as Square payments goes, so that's sort of to come.
Have you been rejected from the App Store app review yet?
So many times. So many times. Yeah, and the worst part is it's sort of like a breakup text. If you reply to it, you get nothing back.
How about around UI performance? Have you had any poor UI performance with React Native, or has the experience been good?
I think it's been really good. You know, it's sort of one of these cases where the local business has a short catalog because they're a coffee house. And so you're displaying not a lot of items. The only thing that could stack up is maybe orders, but those are always, in a 6-month look back or something like that. So there hasn't been the opportunity for UI degradation.
How about, have you run into any instances where access to underlying OS features has been a roadblock in your app development, or prevented you from doing something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, most recently the sign in with Apple thing. These are like native specific things that you have to utilize an SDK for. And when you do that, it's sort of, it takes away from developing everything else.
And I think the last comment that I'll leave you with is that your shower looks pretty nice. Good job.
Thanks.